What is Utah's long-term outlook in the Big 12 since Kyle Whittingham and Cam Rising will soon be gone? That's JT Wistrcill of Locked On Utes joining me. Do you feel like Utah can stay as a perennial conference title contender once the two stalwarts of their program and their conference championship contending and winning era both depart?
I definitely do. I mean, if you look back at what Utah has done, you have someone like Tyler Huntley, who was successful before Cam Rising. You have a four-star in Isaac Wilson, who will hopefully be successful, but I feel like they could recruit other quarterbacks. The bigger loss is obviously Kyle Whittingham, who has been everything for this Utah football program, guided them through unprecedented heights. I mean, he has been on staff at Utah through four conference changes. That's hard to believe. So he's gone through a lot, but he's led Utah to back-to-back Pac-12 championships, those Rose Bowl appearances, and, hopefully this fall, a Big 12 championship. And that's a lot to replace. But Morgan Scalley is clearly the guy. He's been Kyle Whittingham's number one guy for a long time. He's been the head coach in waiting for a while. Yes, there was a controversy, but it felt like things would eventually get back to Morgan Scalley because of the way his former players spoke about him. He's a leader and a guy who's going to keep the culture in place. I would be really concerned about Kyle Whittingham leaving if Utah was then going to make an outside hire. But because of how involved Morgan Scalley is in Utah's recruiting efforts, some of the top recruits that Utah's brought in have been because of Morgan Scalley's effort. He's a natural leader and someone that I do believe is the right choice to lead Utah into their next era. I think Utah will drop off a little bit next year because of what we said. No Cam Rising. Utah, in the transition from Tyler Huntley to Cam Rising, had Jake Bentley in there during the COVID-shortened season. Even without COVID, I don't think that would have been Utah's best team. They lost some games. There was some bumps along the way. And I think next year, because they are losing a lot of players who were even a part of the first championship team back in 2021. So when you're losing that type of veteran presence, there's going to be some regression. But I do believe Utah will get back to being one of the teams in the Big 12 because of how much I believe in Morgan Scalley. He's one of the top defensive minds in college football. You can go back to what he's done against Caleb Williams. It's the reason that USC then tried to hire him this last offseason, in which Utah then made him their head coach in waiting a little bit before that got underway. So he's an elite defensive mind. The defense is going to stay on top. The culture will stay in place. The recruiting will stay in place. I believe Utah will still remain one of the 20 best current teams in the college football landscape.
If you are correct and Scally is able to make it more of, a Marcus Freeman transition or Ryan Day at Ohio State than, say, Mississippi State's handoff did not go particularly well. There have been some other examples too, where they're trying to be more like a David Shaw at Stanford at the beginning rather than at the end. If you're right, 2025 is going to feel like a big opportunity for the rest of the Big 12. Because let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Utah is going to continue being the same program after 2025, and there will be kind of an adjustment year, and he gets the feel for being a head coach and whatnot. That team, without those leaders and without Kyle Whittingham potentially, that's going to be the most gettable Utah might be for a while. But on the recruiting trail and the talent acquisition with the transfer portal writ large for Morgan Scalley, is Utah going to be able to field, you think, a continually top 3 to 4 roster in the Big 12?
I believe so. I just think the culture that they have, and the biggest thing for Utah has never been 24/7 recruiting class rankings. It's the job they've done developing the guys they bring in. No one knew who Brant Keithy was before he arrived at Utah. He was a 2-star. So was Devin Lloyd. He wasn't even a linebacker. There are tons of examples. How about Jaquindon Jackson? He's not at Utah anymore because of how good he was at running back, and then got an NIL deal at Arkansas. So Utah's development is phenomenal. Utah does a better job of retaining coaches than pretty much any team in the country. I mean, they have lost a receiver coach and a running back coach, and that's pretty much it over the years. Andy Ludwig has been at Utah for a while. He even, stayed at Utah over Notre Dame, and there were some contract things there, but still they were able to hold on to their offensive coordinator, Jim Harding, Sharif Shaw. These guys have been their offensive line and DB coach, those two names. They've been there a very long time. And they are the ones who are directly involved in their positions. I always talk about with the Utah secondary, even though they turn over a lot, and Sharif Shaw and Morgan Scalley we trust, because it seems like whoever Utah puts back there, they produce extremely well. because of all the coaches I expect to remain, I still think Utah is going to put out a strong Big 12 roster because, yes, they won't blow you away by bringing in the most 4 stars. Like Deion Sanders in Colorado, they're going to bring in more 4 and 5 stars, but Utah brings in the guys that fit their program, and they've continually done that. And Rice-Eccles Stadium, no matter what happens with the recruits and everything you bring in, Utah's still going to have one of the best home field advantages in the conference, and that's something that's going to make it very hard because each year, at most, Utah's probably going to lose 1 game at home, depending on their home conference schedule, because the altitude coupled with the noise level, it's just one of the toughest environments in college football, despite what EA Sports may tell you.
Or Dan Lanning. I think I think for Utah, it gives me now, and also I made a statement, earlier in this segment, assuming Kyle Whittingham won't be there in 2025. That's my guess. I think you announce a head coach in waiting at this stage because this is Kyle Whittingham's last hurrah. Cam Rising, if he is truly done after this year, and Keithy and whatnot, and the reset that would take place, it would feel like a natural jumping off point for a guy who's been in Salt Lake City for the last 2 decades as the football coach. Does that reality that 2025 is going to be a regression year, probably temporary, but we'll have to wait and see. And we'll definitely talk about it on the show at the time. But does that make the pressure on winning big in 2024 intensify for this Utes program?
I do think it does, because I think if, let's say Utah, if things just went really bad, let's say they had another 8-4 campaign, which is hard to fathom. But if they did, it's another step back. You're expected to win the Big 12 and then you don't. I think that would be something where you're not as strong as you used to be as a program. You don't have that same head coach in place. I think you could see a little regression then. I still expect Utah. I don't expect Utah to lose 4 games, so I think they're going to live up to the hype. Spencer, we've talked about it before on your show. This schedule lines up incredibly favorably for Utah. They missed
very
Kansas
well,
and
very well.
Kansas State in the regular season, and I know they go to Oklahoma State. Their toughest game by far. They could very well lose it. This is a team with a top 5 rush defense last year. Pretty much everyone is back, so I do think they match up well with Ollie Gordon and Oklahoma State overall in that regard. But I do think there's pressure on to win this year, to continue to ascend the brand, make sure you remain in a strong standing, knowing you're going to lose so much and you have to replace them. Some of that will come through the transfer portal, but this is a Utah team that still has built its culture by the recruits they bring in and the players they raise up from within and teach them this is the way you have to come in and fit our program. When you only bring in transfers, that could sometimes be too many individual agendas. I think Colorado's learned that a little bit last year, where I think that's what I like about Utah, is that they bring in these guys that understand the recruits that come in, that this is how we play. If you want to play, you got to play this way. So then when the transfers come in, there's our smaller voices that are like, okay, I got to buy in. Like, it's not a lot of individual voices when you arrive. It's a united voice with this Utah team. That goes back to Morgan Scalley carrying that united voice. But getting back to 2024, it's a big pivotal year. I mean, Kyle Whittingham is straight up talking about that he's probably not going to be here in 2027. They just named the head coach in waiting. He's going to turn 65 in November. He said himself he probably won't coach past 65. I think the writing is more than on the walls that it's going to be his last season at Utah, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think despite the transition to the Big 12, their schedule, as you said, works out really well. And when on that note specifically, the missing of both Kansas schools and then the next best odds team that you play that's kind of, arguably your toughest Big 12 game is Oklahoma State. Look, Oklahoma State is, like Utah, high floor program. They don't bottom out. They also don't always hit the ceiling that a lot of people might think. I know they went to the Big 12 championship game a year ago. I do not expect them to get back there this year. Ollie Gordon will be playing. Why don't I just leave it at that? And Mike Gundy will be, coaching in the game. But man, that's a big quarterback advantage for the toughest game that Utah has in their conference slate. Like Alan Bowman and Cam Rising, this is night and day for me. So I'm with you that real tangible pressure on Utah here. We talked about this all the way back in January, that there's pressure on them to make it. But with the Whittingham factor, I think it is really just ratcheted up, and I think they're capable of getting to that level. But certainly this feels like the year, and it'll be a couple seasons at least before Utah can talk about expecting to win a conference championship again. JT Wistrcill, Locked On Utes. Appreciate the time as always.
Great as going on as always, Spencer. Thank you.